Welcome back to the Historical Movies Podcast, the podcast about historically inspired movies. I'm Ross Evans, I'm an editor, and I'm joined by Professor of Modern History at Liverpool Hope University and historical scriptwriter, Bryce Evans. Bryce, I hope you've got your tricorn hat on for this episode.
Yes, and may I say to you, good day.
Good day, sir. Good day, sir. And coming up, you created this ghost. It's the Patriot. So, Bryce, directed by Roland Emmerich, budget of $110 million, box office $215 million, and Mel Gibson was paid. I'm glad, Bryce, we're back with a Mel Gibson. He's never far from this podcast, never far from our thoughts or hearts. He was paid a record $25 million to do this film. The historical drama epic, which follows Mel as Benjamin Martin, who doesn't want to fight the British during the American War of Independence, but is swept into the conflict when his home life is destroyed. But we don't just get Mel, we don't just get the War of Independence, we also get his eldest son Gabriel, played by Heath Ledger, and some of the family life behind this. I found this one, Bryce, I enjoyed watching it. When what we do, listeners, is we talk about how we got on with the movie, then we usually talk about the history, and at the end we like to ask questions of every movie, one of which is, what was your favourite scene? Well, for me, Bryce, that section is going to take a long time to go through, because this this movie has a lot of scenes that are great, or I very much enjoyed. I'm not sure for the same reasons that Roland Emmerich shot them. I think maybe we've got a difference of opinion, but I did enjoy a lot of the ridiculousness of this movie. Found it a little bit long. Takes a while to get going. Takes about an hour, really, doesn't it? We've got an hour of build-up, and then the end is too short, but we'll come on to that. How did you find The Patriot?
Well, first, I'd like to make it clear that this is The Patriot 2000, not the same named movie of 1998, The Patriot, starring Steven Seagal as Montana Dr. Wesley McLean, whose heroic race against time saves the world from a deadly virus released by a rebel militia leader, Floyd Chisholm. We're not discussing that movie. We are instead going back to the Mel Gibson podcast, as we might as well rename this podcast, because we have another Mel Gibson vehicle here. It's, in my opinion, not one of the best. But I mean, let's thrash it out.
Yeah, well, we are rapidly running out. I think it's We Were Soldiers and Gallipoli for the historical movies that he's made that we'll feature on this podcast. But let's stick with The Patriot. Revenge as a motive, Bryce. I did enjoy this movie. I did struggle with how long it was. I thought it was overly slow. Some stuff could have been cut out. I'm going to look forward to dissecting some of the scenes. But one of the things I don't like in movies, which we have talked about, or which I find limited, shall I say, usually, is a revenge as a motive. I read that Harrison Ford turned down the lead role, and let me remind you, $25 million to star in this movie, because he considered it A, too violent, but B, that it boiled down the American Revolution to one guy wanting revenge. Do you think that's a fair criticism?
Well, I mean, the issues around accuracy are not my problem with this movie. As I'll say later on, my main problem with this movie is the piss poor writing and editing and directing of the movie. But the issues in accuracy, you're going to have to, as we've discussed many times before, take a few liberties. I think it's really interesting, this movie, in terms of criticism. You tend to get American critics who are quite defensive of this movie. I think it's worth mentioning, this comes out the year before 9/11. I think some people in America, in a sort of nationalistic way, defend this film. By the same token, I think a lot of British commentators tend to sort of sneer at it. Now, I would like to say from the start, my beef is not with the depiction of the perfidious Albion, although, of course, Mel, of course, goes over the top, doesn't he, with some of those depictions. But I've no problem, let's make it really clear, I've no problem identifying the Brits as the baddies here.
Yeah, me too.
I completely identify with the rebels, no taxation without representation, and the Republic and all the rest. That's not the issue here. I think really, for me, it comes down to, okay, right, let's address this accuracy straight on. And I'm going to I do like Mel Gibson. I've said that before on the podcast. I know that's probably a minority opinion, but Mel, and I quote, "If one were to adhere to historical accuracy all the way, you'd probably have the most boring 2 hours on earth. In the broad strokes, yes, it's historically accurate. On other levels, it's sheer fancy. It's a good thing that historians are going to harangue this because it'll make somebody pick up a book." And, the much maligned Mel Gibson, I don't think you can really argue with that. It's a conflation. The character, yes, okay, come back to your point there. Revenge movie. It's a conflation of about 3 historical characters. In my opinion, again, as somebody who's written screenplays.
Sorry, you mean Mel Gibson's character is a conflation of 3?
Yeah. Martin is a conflation of 3. Now,
Yeah.
I've written screenplays from this broad period, 18th century. You're gonna have to do that, and I've actually no problem with that. I think probably the plot and the sort of plodding, editing, and very basic revenge motif. Yeah, that's where the problem lies. For me, the problem is not with the accuracy. It's not with the dastardly, the sort of comically overblown, cruel English
cartoon
here.
Bad.
Yeah, because
English.
you need that in a way. If you have to, you're going to have to simplify things in some way. So I'm with Mel on that one. My main beef with it is that it's very hackneyed writing, editing, and directing, I think.
Well, let's talk about the history, because as you said, in Britain, it was met with a lot of ire in terms of historical inaccuracies, mainly around the depiction of the British being so bad or so psychotically evil in many respects. But let's not forget, this is a Mel Gibson and Roland Emmerich double whammy. So we're expecting the history to be, not exactly accurate. The main thing that British critics or British historians found a problem with is when William Tavington, played by Jason Isaacs, burns down the church, Bryce, which I read was based on a massacre, a Second World War massacre, where the SS killed almost 650 people in France by doing a similar thing in 1944. I've read that Richard F. Snow, the historian, said, "Of course it never happened. If it had, do you think Americans would have forgotten it? It would have kept us out of World War One." So a lot of people were pissed off with the fact that scene happened. I too found it completely over the top. I don't think you do need to burn the townsfolk and half of the characters in this film alive to get the point across that the British are the bad guys. This also brings us back to the point that Robert Rodat, who wrote this, also wrote Saving Private Ryan, which we featured on the pod. That fails to depict British troops, was also criticised by British critics for not showing British troops. So is this movie anti-British? Is my question.
Well, I don't care about that.
No, sorry, I would say on that point that I think that the hamminess of the pantomime villain of the English soldiers in this movie, as we've talked about on this podcast, has to be turned up to 11 because it has to give the contrast between good and evil. I found it actually goes a bit too far. As I said, burning down the church, I don't think really makes much sense in this movie. They're bad enough. Shooting a child in cold blood is bad enough. We don't need to have a church burning down as well to realise that these are the bad guys.
Yeah.
Do you think this movie's anti-British though, Bryce? Do you think it does the history a disservice though by overplaying the atrocities by the British?
I think it probably does. I've no real problem with it as being anti-British because, as again, we're talking on the level of Hollywood history here, where you have to establish goodies and baddies. And in this, and in the history, in my opinion, the British were the baddies. I've no problem with that. I think you're right, though, that he turns it up to 11 in the screenplay with that unnecessary scene. I've read this stuff about World War II. I think there's a more immediate historical parallel in the 1798 rebellion in Ireland, which is the same time period as this. There was an atrocity where the Irish rebels, largely Catholic, burnt many Protestants in a barn. I think that's a more obvious parallel than the World War II stuff. But yeah, it's unneeded. Jason Isaacs is the sort of comically villainous Tavington, who's supposed to be Tarleton, of course, is the historical figure.
Yep.
Yeah, you've enough there. This comical stuff when he rocks up to Martin's farm, fire the house and barn, kill the wounded, hang him, destroy the livestock. You've enough there. You've enough. Shoot the child. You've enough.
Stupid boy.
There's enough there. Again, though, like kind of, is it? No, I don't think it's necessarily anti-British. Look, in our family background, on the Irish side, our grandmother was the victim of violence from the British Crown, similar to this, where she had Crown forces as a female, young female, gun waved in her face. I don't think that's over the top. And again, like you say, it as the character of Martin as a reluctant hero, you have to have, as you say, an overblown then villainy to coax him into the fight. But yeah, I would probably agree that it's unnecessary to have that sort of extra cruelty with the barn, and it probably does demean the piece a little bit, because there's other bits and pieces there which are pretty faithful, of course. Should we go? I mean, I think it's probably incumbent upon us though to go through some of the key inaccuracies alongside the church. Well, of course. Well, again, we've always said in this podcast, we don't get hung up on this, and I think personally, I probably agree with Mel Gibson. All good if it raises public awareness, gets people to pick up a book. But some of the key criticisms of the inaccuracy there, actually, I have to say they get the Union flag. As a keen vexillologist, I have to say they get the Union flag correct without the cross of St. Patrick there. Tick. There apparently is no record, though, for the use of the Betsy Ross version of the US flag. That's the circular 13 stars being used at the Guildford Courthouse, although it is used later, of course, at Yorktown, etc. There is, as well, I think this is a significant point, the omission of the significant segment of the population who, of course, were, loyalist. You as well, let's go on here I'm going to preempt the military historian's pedantic profundities here. Field artillery could not fire exploding shells at this time. But,
well, that's classic Hollywood, isn't it?
But for me, I don't care about that. But for me, I think one of the best criticisms is, and this is where I do agree with it, is that because this is appealing to a Hollywood audience in the noughties, you must have a genial character who gets along with the black population. And of course, we're in South Carolina, for goodness sake. And Mr. Martin doesn't own slaves. This must be the only plantation in South Carolina where we have free labor. It's extraordinary. And if we think about even the founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson at his death had 600 slaves. The man who wrote all men are created equal, for goodness sake. So, my goodness, isn't Martin a beacon and an outlier here as someone who doesn't, is so sort of benevolent towards his slaves? So those are the main sort of accuracy issues. But as I say once again, I do agree with Mel. And I'll quote him once again, if you were to adhere to historical accuracy all the way, you'd probably have the most boring 2 hours on Earth. Having said that,
3 hours as this movie
having
is.
said
it
that,
would have been a little better if it was 2 hours.
Well, I think it was on general release shorter. But there are parts of this, on the other hand, which are extremely boring, nonetheless.
2 points you've brought up, which I found particularly... First of all, is that there's no voice about the many Americans who were loyal to the crown, including the guy who comes up with probably Mel's best line in the movie: "Why should I trade one tyrant 3,000 miles away for 3,000 tyrants 1 mile away," which was said by an American clergyman, Martha Biles. It was also very much in favour of the British. I don't mind that, because we know in Hollywood we have to kind of reduce things down. We've got to skip around a few historical things. We can't. There's a limit to how big the window is in terms of how much historical stuff we can get in. I think the point that you've mentioned that's grated a lot of people, and where I would pick holes in this, is the depiction of slavery. Even Mel Gibson said at the choice of making his character not a slave owner, I think I would have made him a slaveholder. Not to seems kind of a cop-out. Yes, and a lot of people were pissed off. And there's that great scene in this movie. It goes from, there's the sort of fat white guy who signs up, doesn't he? He's reading the sign with the black slave, and he says, "First they're going to free him, then they're going to pay him." And the guy says, "I've only got 6 months left to go." And then, of course, by the time their revolutionary fervour reaches the end point, at the battle at the end, the white guy said, "I'm honoured to fight beside you." So we get, even in this movie, not only a complete ignoring of slavery, it's sold.
Yeah.
I didn't realise they sold it this early, Bryce. I thought that slavery went on a lot longer in America and basically ended with the Civil War.
Absolutely. I think this is very problematic. There's another moment which I want to talk about at the very end, which is a big anachronism when it comes to the concept of liberty. But I think that is the biggest point here, because what we're essentially getting in this movie is not the 1780s. We're getting 1865. Let's remind ourselves, South Carolina, was it the first or one of the first states to secede? It is good in a way that this is set in the South rather than on the eastern seaboard, where most stuff happened and where most stuff of this period is set. I found that refreshing. But we're getting 1865 here, not the 1780s. And that is, of course, that's because of the need to bring in audiences, of course. But that is a big problem here, I think. And not, I don't think that's a pedantic criticism, because I think it's so ridiculous that a South Carolina planter would be employing free labour at this stage. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. You brought up Jason Isaac's character, Tavington, based on Banastre Tarleton. If I've got his name or said his name correctly, who is from Liverpool, known as Bloody Ban or the Butcher.
As is Jason Isaacs. Jason Isaacs also of Liverpool, I should point out.
Yes, indeed. Yes, right. I thought you were saying he's known as the Butcher of Liverpool. But he's thought to have, on one side, colonialists said that he was responsible for breaking the Articles of War, the Battle of Waxhaws in 1780. Banastre claimed he was unconscious while his men basically killed some troops who had surrendered from the other side. It's not exactly clear. A lot of people have said, though, I think there was a book in 2002, which is obviously 2 years later than this came out, where they revised the historical view of this figure and basically said, well, he probably wasn't as bad as his nickname would imply.
Well, he certainly didn't burn down a church with a load of men, women and children inside, did he?
That definitely didn't happen. Yeah. That definitely didn't happen. But of course, also in the year when this movie came out, Liverpool City Council, Bryce, that's in your part of the world, called for a public apology as what they viewed as the film's character assassination of Tarleton. So I'm just wondering, the view from Liverpool, are people in Liverpool still pissed off that this film...
Well, I can't speak. I'm not a Scouser and I can't speak for Liverpool City Council, but I do find the intellectual somersaults from the historical memory of Liverpool sometimes quite astounding. Liverpool, of course, the big slave port, where you can still go and see the Confederate embassy in Liverpool. Indeed, the last action of the US Civil War was the surrender of a Confederate ship on the Mersey. Liverpool was very much pro-slavery. Which jars very much, of course, with Liverpool's modern identity as very anti-establishment and very left-leaning and right-on. So it seems to me that is a bit of a silly request from Liverpool City Council. And, again, I suppose symptomatic of some of the somersaults of historical memory that some local councils are wont to engage in.
Yeah, but I suppose they would say that they're doing the guy a disservice. I mean, the thing is that I think the writer, Robert Rodat, said he was based on this historical character. I don't think he needn't have said that. Then we kind of perhaps wouldn't have known. We just have this, pantomime villain. It doesn't need to be specifically based on one person.
But it's not Tarleton. Look, art is not life. His name is Tavington. He's a fictional character. You've got to allow.
Both begin with T.
Yeah, TA. You've got to allow some of this stuff. My more issue with this movie, and I did again. I'll always say with Mel Gibson joints, rollicking good yarns, but it's just I'm not a fan, as I've said before on this pod, of Emmerich, the director. I think some of the writing and editing, some of the screenplay actually is really poor. If I could just go through a list of the sort of what I thought were the most hackneyed, lazy moments of this, right? Of course, the whole trope of a good man, a family man,
yes,
devoted. Again, here we go. This is a recurrent theme with Mel Gibson. Devoted to the memory, of course, of his dead wife. I mean, here we are in Lethal Weapon, aren't we? Claire. Going back to the grave of Claire. This is the dead wife,
yeah.
and which leads us. And another bugbear of mine, as you know, is child actors. and the saccharine, sentimental nonsense of child actors, which leads us, this dead wife, to the gut-wrenchingly vomit-inducing scene where the kids are saying, "Look, Mommy's in the stars looking down on us forever."
The North Star. Bit arrogant, isn't it? Of all the stars to choose the North Star. There's also a point in this movie at the beginning where I thought, hang on, Mel Gibson near a crop field with a child that doesn't talk to them. I thought, and that we're watching Signs at the beginning of this. I thought I put the wrong movie on, and I was expecting the aliens to turn up with a Roland Emmerich flick. You're never too sure if that will happen.
Absolutely. The dead wife is, and again, like, we're back to Lethal Weapon here. Next one I've got is the war is hell motif. Which is seen in nearly every American movie post-Vietnam. The war is hell. Marston will not fight Ross because... Why? He's seen war. Okay? Again, and actually, I'm going to lead on to this now. Again, the laziness of this. A near identical scene, again with child actors, to Braveheart. We discussed Braveheart. It's a scene in Braveheart.
Yes,
where the young...
Very similar film. Very similar.
Willie Wallace is... unwittingly sees Klansmen strung up in a barn, and it's a horrific moment for innocent child eyes. Almost identically, the children here, Martin's children, see these cadavers floating down the river. We've discussed, I think, another hackneyed, lazy piece of writing is the hysterically villainous Jason Isaac. We've discussed that. Another one, of course, is and probably necessary in some ways with movies depicting revolutionary moments, but the I Am Spartacus scene in the church, and Me Too, and who will stand up, and I will as well. Again, it's lazy. And then finally, I found the very 18th century, sure, maybe it's in keeping with the time, grand, but the epistolary narrative of Heath Ledger, the letters I found grated on me after a while. And another thing as well, with you're always going to get this in Mel Gibson, the God-fearing man, the good man. The notion of, sins and atoning for the sins that we get at the start and at the end. Again, that's Mel Gibson. That's very Mel Gibson is an outright Catholic, very right-wing Catholic. Surely in this period and place, you would expect our protagonist to be more of a righteous Protestant. For that was more the character of this particular revolution. So, but anyway, I'm getting sidetracked here. There's several points there where I think this is a hackneyed, lazy, bad screenplay, badly written, badly edited, badly directed, way too long, this movie, and many scenes where people are the slow motion death and the no.
He says wait.
Yeah,
he doesn't even say no.
But I've seen this written off as it was the noughties. As people are, this is one of the greatest abuses of history. People say, "Oh, well, that was the time period." This was only 20 years ago. It's crap for the time. It's not just a part of movies of the time. It's actually crap for the time. So a lot of this movie is crap. I
was just going to say, on that point, I think Mel Gibson gives a great performance in this movie, despite I think struggles with perhaps maybe you would say the script or the directing. I think he's great in this movie.
Come here. On this pod, we will never go down the route of criticizing Mel too much. Look, Mel, you know what you're going to get with Mel. I read one particularly po-faced review of this movie by an English historian who said it's what rot. I think she said what rot. Almost like
was it Jason Isaac
aping the language of the 18th century. You know what you're going to get with Mel. I mean, and I think he's a good actor, and he's a great, leading man in this. He just happens to be the same leading man that he plays in every movie, including Lethal Weapon.
Do you think this movie would have been better if his character died? I was fully expecting him to die, and I tell you why. Because there's a scene where the daughter that doesn't talk to him, which is a classic tired trope, that the daughter that won't forgive him, or I don't know, some bullshit. She. When he's leaving to fight the battle at the end, right at the end, to save America, basically, she actually starts talking again, saying, "Papa, don't go," And I thought, okay, because if that was left unresolved, he would have to come back to resolve it.
Yeah, I mean, but
But
again,
if she says, Papa, don't go, that's been resolved, allowing him to die. So I was certain that Mel was going to die at the end of this movie.
well, again, it's
And join his dead wife, of course. That would be another classic trope, yeah.
lazy child actor. Talk about turning it up to 11 with the child actors. A mute girl carrying a doll around. It's so.
But do you think it would have been better if he died? I think this movie would have been.
No, because he needs to be. It's a flag waving movie where he needs to be waving the flag at Yorktown.
But I thought he would die waving the flag. Like his sacrifice for future generations, kind of shtick that you often get with revolutionary films about revolutions.
It may have that may even have been too much for this. In you know what I mean? They might have thought, my goodness, that's even ramping it up too much to have him a martyr as well as a reluctant patriot. I think actually on that point, they just to sort of preempt the ending there. Similar to, we discussed in this past pod the Battle of Algiers, where it's discussing a discrete time period, but it's necessary to tell the story about what happens next.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's a little bit clumsy, isn't it? Because we need, like in the Battle of Algiers, we need to go, oh yeah, but 4 years later they won the war. Right at the end, almost messily included. I found that the end here as well. You've got to sort of fast forward a few years and say, but actually, hang on, we actually won the war at Yorktown. It's very quick, very rushed, actually. Which kind of again
battle, independence, end.
Yeah.
I think I was thinking about this movie. What would I take out? And I think you talked about the editing. A lot of it could be just sped up a little bit. You could take out 20 seconds here or there from a scene, and it would speed the whole thing up a lot. But there's too much of the stuff, and it kind of feels like there was a different version of this script, and it's gone through different iterations. The stuff with you could have taken out the stuff with Heath Ledger, Gabriel. I didn't really need that, and it doesn't really go anywhere. She gets burnt to a crisp anyway. His love interest.
And then Tavington kills him. And then Tavington kills Heath.
You don't need because Tavington's already killed the little son. You don't need him to then kill the second son. You've already got the revenge motive. You've already got Tavington being the big pantomime baddie. This really,
but at that point,
Tavington's cut it all out.
Tavington's got his hair down at that point. He's like he's balls out. He's balls out, isn't he? He's just like
yeah, that's a great scene. I don't really understand that scene. Is it supposed to be that everyone dies apart from those two at the end?
I think it's quite a homoerotic scene, actually. It's very weird. It's a very weird scene. I'll tell you what's another really weird sexual thing in this movie is the many scenes where Martin, Mel Gibson, is just dying to jump on the sister-in-law.
Yes, I found it particularly odd when basically he kisses her in front of the... So you're kissing your dead wife's sister in front of your children, and they're all going, yeah, okay, fine. They're not going to have need psychological counselling for the next 10 years because Daddy's working his way through the family at this point. It's ridiculous, actually.
Well, actually, that's another point in terms of, that lust for the dead wife's sister of the time more believable than the benevolent father. We get strict Mel here, but we also get him for the 18th century, very indulgent father, putting up with nonsense from his kids and whining.
That's
and
true,
Daddy,
yeah.
I don't like this. Which is, again, completely anachronistic. As is the scene, of course, where he goes, I don't need principles, I'm a dad. This very sort of 21st century notion of fatherhood, which again is... So it's actually more believable that he wants to jump on the sister-in-law all the time. The way it's conveyed, though, I think is a bit creepy. It's sort of nearly every time he sees her, he's almost sort of about to sort of pounce on her.
Yeah, well, no, the directing is that she's gagging for it as well, of course. So, I mean... Yeah. I find it bizarre. We did 10,000 BC though, Bryce, on the podcast, which we both thought indeed. Spoiler alert if you haven't heard the podcast episode, but you could probably imagine that's maybe what we would have come up with. Do you think this is a better innings from Roland? Is this his best historical movie?
I think this is a better film, which isn't saying much. It's a better film than that. I'm going to preempt Sood's Corner by quoting the last movie Outpost, which is quite a respected movie website with reviews on it, which claims, to answer your question, and I quote, "This is the best film by Roland Emmerich." And I think that's clearly untrue. If we could step outside historical pieces, that's clearly untrue, because as we both know, the best film by Roland Emmerich is...
Independence Day.
That's right. White House Down, starring Channing Tatum. No, of course it's Independence Day. So I think some people have got completely carried away with this. It's probably his best historical piece, but that's not saying much. I don't rate him as a director at all, and I don't rate this movie.
No, I did. We have, as we often do on this movie, we're not afraid to dig a movie out. But also enjoy watching it. You know, there's nothing wrong with enjoying bad cinema. I do quite enjoy watching bad films, and I think this works quite well in that respect. I just wanted to pick your brains as well. You mentioned just coming back to the historical stuff quickly, that Mel Gibson's character is based on 3 or 4 people, one of which, Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, led guerrilla warfare in South Carolina. Is basically, it seems that he's most strongly based on that character. And there was a lot of controversy about the fact that, again, he owned slaves, but also that he killed Native Americans for fun and was a prolific rapist. And I'm just wondering if there is some kind of, we've talked a lot about historical inaccuracies in this film. I saw the History Buffs episode about this. The guy almost had an aneurysm at how many historical inaccuracies there are in this movie. Has Mel again gone too far? We did say in our Apocalypto episode, we felt that his handling of the Maya went too far and did a disservice to the Maya.
As I said before, it's set in, what is kind of refreshing is it's set in the South. I like that. So it's not in Boston or New York or Philly. It is in South Carolina. It is, from what I've read, the character of Martin is an amalgam of about 3 people. No problem with that. You've got to do that with these kind of things. On the violence, again, everyone tends to point the finger at Mel. I will direct you, though, to the screenplay. And the level of violence in the screenplay is... when you're writing screenplays, often if you want to convey something emphatically, you'll use block capitals. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll just go through a couple of scenes and quote directly here, and I'm gonna shout. I'm gonna emphasize my voice where it's block capitals, which you use sparingly, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the screenplay, we've got a scene. This is the one where Martin is ambushing some redcoats. Here we go, and I quote: "Vicious, savage Martin kills with stunning brutality, hacks a redcoat wide open." Okay. Here we go. A later one. This is a later engagement. Martin charges, firing, point blank range. Martin and his cohort slaughter the redcoats, hack them to death. Right. That's like it's a violent. To be fair to Mel, it's a violent screenplay. It's excessively violent in the way it's written. So I'm going to let him off the hook there. Has he gone too far? No, I think the guy who wrote the screenplay, what's the name again?
Robert Rodat.
Yeah, I think he goes too far.
Yeah, I would agree. Just a point on the violence. I watched this on the train, this movie, and I actually thought, possibly the most embarrassing thing would be a sex scene to watch on a train, and other people sort of can see thinking, what the hell is he watching? And thankfully there isn't one really in this movie. But there is someone getting decapitated by a cannonball and people losing like shins with a cannonball. Apparently Roland Emmerich, they said, if you take, to avoid an R rating, take out the shot where the guy gets decapitated with a cannonball. And he said, no, I want to leave it in. So, again, talking about the violence, not always Mel's fault, but often it is.
Well, your embarrassment on a train, Ross, I have to say, unfortunately, that's what the American Revolution was fought for, so that you wouldn't feel embarrassed in public. That's the whole point of American independence, where you can be loud, obnoxious and silly very publicly and have no shame for it. That seems to me to be the point of the whole American independence project. So I think you've thereby exposed yourself as sort of adhering to the colonial manners, which
I'm a royalist. All along. I don't believe it. Okay, let's move on to. Before we get on to that, Bryce, today's piece of trivial trivia: the scene where Benjamin offers Gabriel an apple was improvised. So we'll move on to our list of questions. First of which is which part should Mel Gibson have played? But I mean, we've answered that. So we'll come on to your favourite character or performance, Bryce.
Well, it has to be Mel. and that leads me to my favourite scene, which is, or a couple of scenes, which are Mel's killing rage. I can only describe it as Mel's killing rage with tomahawk in hand. The savagery, as emphasised, vicious savage Martin. Mel is only going by the screenplay, and he delivers.
As usual, he's delivering at 100%. I did enjoy the French colonel. I quite liked his character, especially when he goes, if I die, I will die well dressed. And he also says, he also makes a joke about war crimes at one point, when he comes back. When they're in the swamp base and they kill a few redcoats. And he says, great to be back for the opportunity to kill a few redcoats and a few wounded ones when you're not looking.
Well,
war crimes.
I mean, war crime, well, we haven't yet got to the Geneva Convention, have we? So
that's
notion
true, I suppose.
But yeah, that's actually interesting. And pleased you brought him up, the Frenchman. One of my favourite parts of what I would rate as another stellar performance from Mel Gibson is his open contempt for the French. I think that's really funny. Where it's one scene where he just goes, "Damn French" or something like that. What I do, I'm going to just pursue this just quickly. In the original, I went back to the original screenplay here. Yep. Of course, we have to, for the conclusion of it as the story of the American Revolutionary War and the victory of the Continental Army, we have to clumsily fast forward to the end. Where we have the scene where it's Mel and the Frenchman looking at the French fleet finally showing up, as they never seem to manage to do in Ireland, with Ireland's rebellions, with the exception of General Humbert in 1798, although that was a pretty unsuccessful landing. But finally the French are there. Now, originally in the screenplay, the line is just spoken by the Frenchman. He just says, he looks onto the ships and says, "Vive la France." Okay. Now, in the film, Martin says "Vive la France," and the Frenchman comes back at him and says "Vive la liberté," which actually is better, but it's not better in the sense of historical accuracy, because that's glaringly anachronistic. Because liberté, égalité, fraternité, we haven't got there yet, have we? This is still royalist France. This is not the notion of liberty in the revolution. So again, that's been changed. I don't know who's changed that, but in the original, much more believably historically, it's just "Vive la France." Probably better for the piece, it's "Vive la France, vive la liberté," but also that again is a big, like a lot of this film, like a lot of anachronism there.
Before we get on then to your favourite scene, we just have to, of course, mention Jason Isaac's performance as Tavington, and the fact that Kevin Spacey was the first choice, but because they paid Mel $25 million, they couldn't afford him, apparently. I can't really imagine Spacey in that role, though. I think it's too pantomime for him. It's too over the top, isn't it? Stupid boy.
So Spacey's more of a sort of calculated baddie, isn't he?
He's too clever. Exactly. Tavington's too brutal, isn't he? He's burning people in churches. I've got a huge list of scenes to go through. We've been through a few of them. You mentioned the ambush scene where him and his sons just rip apart a load of redcoats. He just goes crazy with a tomahawk. I enjoyed the ridiculousness of the formal ball scene where the boat blows up and one of the posh lady goes, "Ooh, fireworks," and then Jason Isaacs downs the champagne. Also, I liked the fact that when he returns Cornwallis's dogs, Cornwallis has lost the respect of his dogs. They know which way the wind is blowing. Also, at the end there, Bryce, I like the shot where just before the final battle, he's riding off on his horse. He's, I've lost a couple of sons. Is it really worth it? And then he looks at the American flag and thinks, yeah, I'm going back for a brawl. So I enjoyed that a lot. But my number one scene has to be when Jason Isaacs goes full-blown bastard, turns up at the house, shoots the wounded, kills the child, says "stupid boy" in the manner of Captain Mannering in Dad's Army. And then, you get like this slow zoom in on Thomas's, the dead child's toy soldiers, which is later made into a musket shot. Great fun. So, and then soon afterwards, Mel comes out of his house in like a flowing white shirt covered in weapons. A bit like that scene in Commando where he's getting geared up with grenades, machetes, everything. So that was my favourite scene.
Yeah, it's a good scene. Like I said, I think some of the lines, some listeners might be aware of the English comic actor Matt Berry, I think of very Matt Berry-esque. Destroy the livestock. What is it? Fire the house and barn.
Why are none of his men helping him in the battle at the end? When it's 1-on-1 between Mel and Tavington, why is no one helping them?
Nobody likes Tavington. That's pretty well
No, I
established.
know, yeah, but they're both surrounded by... They're in the middle of a battle, But anyway, there we go. So what was your favourite scene then?
Oh, my favourite thing was it's the two scenes, the Killing Rage, with the tomahawk, as mentioned.
One.
Yeah, the first one,
yeah.
And then the second one where they butchered the guys in cold blood.
Okay.
Yeah, war is hell.
Well, Keith Ledger does say we're better than that. Is that
Keith
the moment?
Ledger? Who's Keith Ledger?
His lesser-known twin brother from Hackney. No, he says at one point we're better than that, doesn't he? When they kill innocent guys, and then Mel's like, "Oh yeah, good point, we are." There's no debate. It's like, "Oh, sorry, yes, you're right. I forgot that here I am killing people in cold blood." Who would do the DVD commentary? Did you get anything for this?
Yeah, I
didn't give this any thought, to be honest.
Well, my answer to this was I'd like to hear from one of the black people living in the South at this time on the plantation. Yeah. Was life in the South in the 1780s one big hoolie on the beach with Heath Ledger standing around half naked, dancing around with the whites? How were they actually treated by the whites? I find that is the sort of big glaring issue with this. So wouldn't be any harm to have a bit of a corrective provided by a black character.
Oh, that's a very good point. I agree with that. Best companion film. There's not actually so many decent American Revolutionary War films out there, are there? Did you come across the Al Pacino vehicle that exploded almost before it left the plant, called Revolution from 1985? You know this film? I'd never heard of it before. Stars Al Pacino and Donald Sutherland. Pacino stars, we've heard this plotline before, Pacino stars as a frontiersman in the colony of New York who involuntarily becomes involved in the revolutionary cause during the American Revolutionary War. Quotes from critics: an almost inconceivable disaster, and so bad it puts you in a state of shock. Apparently Al Pacino took a 4-year break from making films because it was so badly received, that film. I've never heard of it. But if we get to 100 episodes, Bryce, maybe we should feature it.
Well, he does seem to be quite miscast there. My companion would be another, I think, quite poor historical movie, which is 2016's American Civil War movie, Free State of Jones, starring Matthew McConaughey, which is about an armed revolt against the Confederacy. So we're down south in Jones County, which took place actually in real life. But again, it's a bit like this movie. I don't want to start a huge big discussion here, but one of the central problems that you have if you're making a patriotic American movie about this broad period and about violence in America as opposed to abroad is this notion of the frontiersman looking after his family versus the federal government. The trying to convey a more homespun sense of liberty than reality and history actually sort of allow for. Trying to convey a defense, shall we say, of what becomes like the federal government, and the United States. Whilst still trying to appeal to that very broad constituency, which is the very American, nobody's going to tell me what to do kind of vein of anti-state kind of. So that's the reason I compare it to Free State of Jones, which is trying, again, like this movie, really clumsily to do that, but about 80 years later in the American Civil War, which, as I've mentioned before, this movie almost... Well, actually,
it wants to be set.
It wants to be 1865, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So what's going into our Hall of Fame, our museum piece? What are we having?
Well,
I've got the lead pistol shot made from poor little Tommy's melted down toy soldiers. There's an analogy there, Bryce.
Well, that's very good because I have written down what we're going to the museum. It can't be the little toy soldiers because they're now melted. So instead, I put the air horn of Heath Ledger's father-in-law, where he listens to goings on through the bedroom door, etc.
Oh, yes, of course. Yes, yes. Well, ear horns need to come back in.
It's a really good comic prop in this movie.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, when you said the word melted there, every time I hear the word melted, I hear it in a Scouse accent, because isn't there a famous interview with, is it Steven Gerrard, when they said, what's your favourite type of cheese? And he said melted.
Melted, yeah.
Melted. The cannonball, the toy soldiers were melted. Movie physics. Oh, sorry, what would happen in the sequel if there was one? Well, you maybe just mentioned it should be 80 years later when this film actually wants to be set.
Well, exactly. Almost, this film is almost running into it's almost becoming like How the West Was Won, isn't it? It's almost becoming the story of 18th and 19th century America, which would probably run on to another 2 or 3 hours. It'd probably be one of those horrible kind of 5-6 hour long epics.
Roland, I've got another film for you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who get shot in this film, and then there's blood pouring out of them immediately. Just because movie physics. There's only one ridiculous impaling. I'm a fan of ridiculous impaling, and that is when Mel Gibson impales Tavington's horse with the American flag at the end. But that's ridiculous, not physically, but just in.
I'm glad they kept in the decapitation. Actually, it's a good decapitation.
Yeah, and there's one where I think it was. The Napoleonic Wars, where someone a cannonball was rolling down a hill, and a soldier apparently kicked it like a football, and it took his leg off from the knee down, apparently. So I think that's accurate. Have you got anything, Bryce, for Sude's Corner, Pedant's Corner?
I have. I've already mentioned the last movie Outpost review, which I'll just go on to, which is as flag waving as the movie itself. It says that this is quote, a truly exceptional film that captivates from start to finish. Gripping storytelling, and a powerful reminder that the determination to fight for what is right can prevail. So, I mean, I'm not going to be as gushing when we come to score this as that by a long shot.
What did you give it out of 10?
I gave this movie, to come to this, I gave this movie a 4 out of 10. I think largely because my beef is not with Mel. I want to make that clear if Mel's listening.
You've made that clear, bro. You've made that very clear in this episode.
Mel Gibson, my problem's not with you. It's with the script. It's with the direction. It's incredibly clunky and blocky, overlong movie. In fact, watching this, I felt like watching an opera. Act 1, finish. Act 2, finish. Act 3. It's so blocky and clunky. The plot is paint by numbers and lazy. And for that reason, I'm going to give it a low mark of 4. Still a good romp. Too long, though, really, to be a sort of digestible kind of action flick. So 4 out of 10.
That was my main problem with it as well. I think it is just too long. I gave it a 5. And, of course, then we get it takes an hour, really, to get going properly. And then you've got a very sort of rapid ending.
Yeah.
And a lot of the threads that are woven at the beginning, I don't think do a brilliant job of... 1, describing what's going on particularly well historically, and 2, giving us enough of the background stuff like Heath Ledger and the family stuff. I'm not that invested in it. And the fact he's got 7 kids, apparently it's because Mel Gibson had 7 kids when he made it. I mean, does that help him act? I don't know. I've no idea. But, a lot of them, I'm not really interested in that. It's kind of, it's not tied into the core of the film, really. Anyway, there we go. Delighted to have Mel back on the pod, in spirit at least. That was great fun, Bryce. Thanks very much for listening, everybody, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Historical Movies Podcast. That's it for this episode of the Historical Movies Podcast. Don't forget to leave us a review on your chosen podcast platform. Spotify and Apple Podcasts make a huge difference to the algorithm. And if you're on YouTube, don't forget to leave a comment or a like or subscribe. Thanks very much for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.